Welcome to another episode of the Unwind with Me podcast. I am reading from a book entitled A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. I am picking up in chapter 5, I Lose Inyati. Water, delicious cold water, being dashed in my face and trickling down my parched throat, brought me again to my senses. I lay, sore and bruised and with throbbing head and limbs, beside some tall reeds, between which water glittered in the light of the rising moon. Inyati bent over me, and he uttered an exclamation of joy as I opened my eyes. "Master, master, I thought thee dead," he cried, "and surely would I then have died too. Right sorely did I beat thee, master, there among the devil flowers to keep thee from the sleep that kills. But there was no one to beat me, and I had but strength and sense to tie myself too upon my horse before I too slept. And surely my Sajambuk must have helped them against the poison flowers, for they came right through, having smelt the water maybe, and brought us here to its very side, where I awoke to find them drinking. But the other is there in the dunes. He will sleep well, that one, and die." And die he did, for the next day, refreshed and fearing the flowers little in the daytime, we went back to the dune where we had left our packs. It was barely a mile, and about halfway we found the third horse dead. The pan was but a small one, and the delicious water of the night proved to be but a few gallons of stagnant liquid full of animalculae. But there was grass for the horses, and to our joy we found that the flower belt did not extend beyond where we had emerged from it. Bare dunes spread again beyond, but even these were welcome after our experience with the devil flowers, as Inyati called them. Buck was plentiful, and for a day or two we ate, drank, and slept to our heart's content, gathering all the strength we could for our next attempt. Inyati was full of confidence for the future, confident that we should never have difficulties to encounter equal to those we had surmounted, and that the diamonds and wives would soon be at our disposal. "North, master, almost due north now, and we shall find pans on the way with water. My magic stone has told me that, and it makes no mistakes, and tomorrow we start again, for the water will last but a few days. Moreover, we have been long on the path." Poor Inyati, the bravest, cheeriest comrade, black or white, that I had ever had. Little did I dream when he spoke thus that he would never live to see the morrow. That evening, as we sat smoking by the fire, we noticed that the two horses were extremely nervous, pricking their ears and snorting as they cropped the dry grasses a few yards away from us. "Leopards," suggested Inyati. "There may be many spores here, but no lions." But scarcely had he spoken when the booming roar of a lion came from the direction of the pool, to be immediately answered by another and another, until it was evident that the pan had been invaded by a numerous troop of them. We both started to our feet with the same thought in our minds. If they were hungry, they might probably attack the horses. It was still light, but no time was to be lost. So hastily cutting down a number of the stunted thorn bushes with which the pan abounded, we proceeded to build a sherm in which to pass the night. We enclosed a space about 15 yards square, and into this we brought the horses, together with enough food to keep a fire burning all night. And as the hedge was 7 or 8 feet in height and of impenetrable thorn, we felt but little anxiety as to the presence of the lions. As night fell, however, their roars became louder and nearer, and by midnight there were at least a dozen of them pacing round our sherm, and barely kept it at a distance by the frequent firebrands as we threw over the fragile protection. Occasionally, the huge beasts fought amongst themselves, and the snarling, growling pandemonium would become more deafening. Then this diversion would cease, and the whole troop would continue their pacing round our fence, sniffing and snorting at us through the thorn bushes, and making us feel as one can imagine a mouse feels when caught in a trap, and with a hungry cat peering through the bars at him. Time after time, we scared them away by throwing firebrands among them, but always they returned, and to our dismay, long before morning we realized that our stock of firewood would not nearly last till daylight. We had refrained from shooting, as it was impossible to see the brutes through our sherm, but as the fire got lower and they became more daring, we sent a few shots among them, and the hellish hubbub that ensued showed that some of them were hit. But this proved disastrous, for a wounded animal in its death struggles near the fence. Came in contact with the bushes and almost tore down our only protection before a few more bullets finished it. There came a lull for a short time after this, and we were congratulating ourselves that morning would soon be dawning, when the lions would slink away, or when the light would enable us to finish them, when, without the least warning, a huge form leapt clean over the hedge and landed in the center of the sherm, scattering the few remaining embers in all directions. A second spring, and before either of us could shoot, the lion had pounced upon Inyati and had him down upon the ground beneath him, shaking the poor fellow like a terrier shakes a rat. Mad with rage, I sent bullet after bullet into the brute's head and body till the click of the hammer of my Winchester showed the magazine was empty, and the lion rolled over dead, with Inyati still in its mighty grip and to all appearance dead also. Then I must have gone berserk mad. I remember cramming the magazine full again and throwing aside the bush that blocked the entrance. I stepped out among the lions. I can never understand why I was not killed instantly, but not a lion reached me, and at close range I fired shot after shot in the bright moonlight, and lion after lion fell, till but 2 were left, and as morning dawned these slunk away, leaving me alone with my dead. Then I came back to the sherm, my mad fit of rage over, and nothing but grief and a sorrow too deep for words to express left in my heart. The huge lion lay right across the poor boy's body, still gripping his crushed shoulder in its mighty jaws. But now I saw that in spite of his terrible injuries, Inyati was not dead, though he was dying even as I came back to him. Strong as I was, no strength of mine could have freed him from the grip of those terrible jaws, and as I struggled to do so, his beseeching glance stopped me. I knelt down beside him. "Finished, master, finished," he whispered. "Yet we have made a good fight, and you, master, will win. Straight north now. Bury the little gun with me, master. It may serve me, who knows? And take thou the blue stone, and this my armlet, it may help. Master, master, I go." And with his eyes fixed upon me, he died, that brave heart that had served me so well. I was stupefied with the blow that had fallen upon me, and lay for an hour or more as one stunned. Once or twice the craven thought came upon me to use a bullet to end it all, and once I actually lifted my revolver to my head. But dead Inyati's last whisper seemed again to sound in my ear. Had I made a good fight, and to end it like a coward? And so I lay in the shade of a tree and sleep. The blessed healer came to me and saved my reason. For when I awoke, although my heart was heavy, my brain was clear, and I knew what lay before me, and no longer shirked the task. The lion's head I hewed from its body, for I could not tear its huge jaws asunder to release Inyati, and there I buried victim and victor together. And so I was alone, in the heart of the desert, with return an impossibility. I struck north as Inyati had told me, due north, in spite of the fact that in that direction the dunes were of the worst, and for a day and a half and half a night I wayfared, striving in sheer physical suffering to drown the sorrow of losing Inyati. God knows what I went through, or the poor horses that I drove ruthlessly forward. Moreover, the fever that was already burning in my veins may have rendered me delirious. Certain it is that this part, and many a day afterwards, is but a confused dream to me, a dream of suffering, of incessant wandering from pan to pan. Here, a few mouthfuls of stagnant water, and there a few tisama, still keeping myself and the horses alive. For the days, the wandering must have been purely mechanical. But one day, I came to myself just as the sun was setting. I felt weak and exhausted, but perfectly sane. I was parched, and my water skin was gone, probably thrown away in a fit of frenzy or despair. I could not remember. The horses, mere wrecks of what they had been, were munching the last of a small patch of tisama, and I was barely in time to rescue a couple of still eatable ones to moisten my parched tongue. I had no idea how long I had been lying there unconscious, but the idea of pushing north had now become an obsession with me, and I staggered to the highest dune to look around me. I was still in a wilderness of dunes, but I noticed that what little vegetation there was new and strange to me. Indeed, except for the tisama, there was scarce a bush or plant I could recognize. It was evident that I had traveled far in my delirium, and my heart bounded as I made out away to the north, a kopje of rugged rocks rising from the dunes. Here, apparently, then I was at length reaching the confines of this wilderness of sand, for these were the first rocks that I had seen since we entered the desert. It seemed a lifetime back. The kopje was in the right direction too, for Inyati had said, "Keep north," and by reaching it I should at least be able to spy out the land. I lost no time in saddling up, finding that I had still a small amount of biltong and plenty of ammunition left. Nearly all night I trekked through barren dunes, but these were now small and easy to traverse compared to the mountains of sand I had already passed through. And when I lay down for an hour before dawn, I felt sure daylight would show me to be near the kopje. Such was the case, for I found myself barely a mile from it, and soon had reached its bare and boulder-strewn base. It was perhaps 300 feet high, of bare granite boulders heaped one on the other, with big cavities between them, and all so rounded and smooth that I had great difficulty in climbing it. But at length I stood on the huge boulder poised on the summit, and from it, to my joy, I saw glimmering away on the far northern horizon a wide stretch of water. I rubbed my eyes and peered again and again, for often the false mirage had raised my hopes to a frantic pitch by its glittering deception. But this was water, and I could scarce refrain from setting forth immediately in its direction. Yet, knowing the exhausted state of the horses, I feared to do so. And seeking a hollow under a gigantic boulder, I lay through the heat of that long scorching day, parched and longing for the water I had seen, dreaming of it when I dozed, and gloating over it when I awake. How I would revel in it! Could I ever be satisfied again to do aught but drink, and lay and soak my sun-scorched body in it, and drink again? Impatient as I was, the day seemed intolerably long, but at length the sun was sufficiently low to allow the horses trekking again, although the poor beast's plight was pitiful. Again I trekked through the better part of the night due north, and with no fear of missing the water, for it was a wide sheet that the kopje had shown me, almost a lake it appeared to be. Towards morning, the horses were so exhausted that I could scarcely urge them forward, and I myself but stumbled doggedly on, kept alive solely by the knowledge that soon now I should drink. And now, thank God, I could see the water faintly reflecting the light in the east, and just as the sun rose, I stumbled clear of the dunes. Before me stretched a wide sheet of water, several miles in length, the shores barren and destitute of vegetation, and without a sign of bird or animal life. My heart misgave me as I noticed how silent, dead, and forbidding the place was. Noticed, too, that the horses made no attempt to reach the water they were dying for, but stood dejected and spiritless where I had let go of their bridles. A few staggering strides and my awful doubt was confirmed, for the water was as salt as brine. And now for a time I gave way to absolute despair. I was exhausted and tortured by thirst, my lips cracked and swollen, my tongue like leather. And I felt that when the sun reached its full power, I must perish in the horrible agony and madness of a death from thirst, unless indeed my revolver saved me the last torture. Sorely was I tempted as I lay there by the brink of the salt lake, where I had thrown myself down in the agony of my disappointment. But, thank God, I kept my sanity, and even in that terrible plight, hope again crept into my heart. Tessama, there might be Tessama there to the right where the dunes were higher and the sand redder. Certainly a little dark vegetation appeared to show in the hollows. And so I staggered to my feet again, and leaving the horses, I made my panting, laborious way across to the dunes I had marked on the eastern shore of the lake. They were about half a mile away, and it seemed as though I should never reach them. But at length I entered the hollow between two of them and found a few stunted bushes covered with red berries the size of cherries, and the like of which I had never seen before. I hesitated to eat them, for many of the desert berries are poisonous, and almost all are bitter and acrid. But I could see no tessama, and so I bit one, hesitatingly at first, but as the sharp, delicious flavor penetrated my scorched palate, ravenously. Cool, full of juice and of a flavor something like a black currant, they tasted to me the most delicious morsel that I had ever passed through my lips, and all thoughts of their being poison left me as I plucked and ate them greedily. Most grateful they were, and soon I felt a new being, though some poisonous properties they must have contained, for within a few minutes I felt a rush of blood to my head, a buzzing in my ears, and was soon staggering as though drunk. I ate no more then, and in a short time the effects passed off, and wonderfully refreshed and invigorated, I made my way back to the horses, who, the image of despair, stood where I had left them. I literally dragged them to the little bushes, which to my delight they ate greedily, fruit, foliage, and even the bare twigs. So again I was respited, but I knew it to be only a respite, for the bushes were few and I could find no sign of others or of Tessama. And so for days I wandered, finding a few of the berries here and there, often half maddened and stupefied by them, my head awhirl too with fever, alternately hoping and despairing, my sense of direction almost gone, striving whenever possible to work north in my lucid moments, but finding often by crossing my own spoor that I had been wandering in a vain circle. Then one afternoon, as I lay in a sort of semi-stupor beneath one of the bushes that had yielded me a fair number of berries, a sharp gust of wind aroused me, and looking around me, I saw whirling across the bare dunes towards me a huge cloud of thick, opaque dust, gathering up the loose sand as it sped, whirling high in the air and blotting out the whole sky with its dense volume, snatching up, carrying away, and burying deep again all that came in its path. It was a sandstorm, and I was in its path, here amongst the loose dunes where escape seemed impossible. I must fly or be buried. The horses, snorting with fear, would have bolted had I not caught them quickly, and tired as they were, they needed no urging on from the destroying monster that sped relentlessly after them. The dunes were here low and open, and the red berries on which the horses had lived of late seemed to have maddened and stimulated them, for they seemed to fly on the very wings of the wind. Right before the storm they sped, the first advance gusts eddying around us, the sky overhead already thick with the flying sand. And now, maddened with fever, intoxicated with the strange stimulation of the berries I too had been eating, I no longer fled in fear, but in its place came a wild exhilaration, and I shouted aloud as I flogged the panting horses to further efforts. Now, to my disordered brain, the sandstorm was a legion of pursuing fiends that snatched at me from every gust and eddy. Now, too, they were gaining on us, and I shrieked and fought with the imaginary demons as, in spite of the speed of the horses, the storm gained on us and enveloped us more and more at every stride. And so for an eternity I seemed to fly, now hemmed in with blinding sand, seeing nothing, knowing nothing, but an overpowering desire to escape from the clutching fiends around, tortured with thirst, maddened, screaming. Dark now, as at midnight, except when a flash of forked lightning burst through the driving chaos. Now I had burst free again, as the storm veered in another direction, yet still it threatened me, and still I galloped on. Then a snort of fright from the horses, a wild plunge forward that almost threw me from the saddle, a sense of falling, a stunning crash that seemed to me to be the bursting asunder of the world's very foundations, and then a merciful oblivion. Chapter 6. The Crater, the Pleasant Berries, Sleep, and the Awakening. I awoke to the tortures of the damned, crushed, broken, and in agonizing pain, and with the asphodels tearing at my face. Pinned to the earth as by some great weight, my hands were fortunately still free, and my revolver still in its holster, and a few shots sent the lewd, cowardly birds flapping away. The blood was streaming from my face, and again I fainted with sheer agony. Moreover, the fierce midday sun beat down intolerably full in my eyes, for I lay on my back and could move nothing but my arms. But gradually the sun passed, a cool shadow fell across me, and although I believed I was hurt unto death, and indeed longed for death to end my agony, some modicum of relief must have come with the shade, and with it strength and the desire to live. Moreover, it was borne upon me that from somewhere near me came the sound of running, gurgling water, tantalizing and maddening me in my pain and agony. I was lying on a slope with my head lower than my limbs, and all I could see was the sky above me. Do all I could not lift myself, and could not see what pinned my lower limbs to the sand. But, maddened more, I believe, by thirst and hearing water running than by the actual agony of my hurt, I at length began to work at the sand on either side of me with my hands, scratching it away until I had altered my position enough to enable me to turn somewhat and raise myself a little on one elbow. Then I found it was my dead horses that pinned me down, for both of them lay crushed and broken partly above me, and looking upwards I saw that a sheer cliff of smooth rock towered straight above me, from which the horses had evidently fallen. I could hear the water plainer now, and though I swooned once or twice from agony, I gradually worked my limbs clear of the incubus pressing on them, and then tried to stand up. But this I could not do, some injury to my spine preventing me, and it was a beast on all fours that I at length made shift to crawl in search of the water I was dying for. Each yard I crawled was agony to me, but at last I came to a rock-encircled pool in which lay water clear and deep, and into which a tiny stream splashed and gurgled from an overhanging cliff. Sweet and pure the water was, and in great abundance. I peered into its dark depths and could see the white sand glimmering at the bottom, full 10 or 12 feet below me as I judged. I crawled to it, and I drank as I had never drank before, and I bathed my tortured face and limbs, finding that, miraculously, none were broken, though I was bruised and aching in every bone, and to stand erect was quite beyond me. So I drank and slept, and drank again, and later found strength and appetite sufficient to crawl back to where the dead horses lay, and to search among the scattered contents of my pack for some biltong, and the wherewithal to dress my wounds. And thus for days I lived, and nursed myself gradually back to a measure of my former strength, dragging myself painfully from the water to the shadow of the rocks to sleep, feeling little anxiety as to where I was or what was to happen to me. I had water in plenty and food sufficient for the present, and after the awful experiences of the desert, my one desire was to rest and sleep. But with returning health came curiosity, and although I was still bent and could not walk upright, I managed to move about and to find out something of this strange prison into which I had been hurled in my frantic flight before the sandstorm. Apparently, I was in the hollow cup of an extinct crater, for on all sides towered perpendicular cliffs of dark granite-like rock, so smooth and unbroken for the most part that a baboon would scarce have found foothold upon them indeed. In many places they actually overhung. Almost circular, and about 1/4 of a mile in diameter, the floor of this place was to a great extent covered in verdure, broken here and there with rocks, and except where I had fallen, there was but little bare sand. How I had escaped being smashed to pieces was inexplicable, for the sheer wall of rock that penned me in was, I judged, at least 500 feet in height, and the horses' bones, now picked clean by the aasvogels, had been smashed by the terrible fall. A short examination of my little domain showed me that although escape from it was apparently hopeless, especially in my maimed condition, there was no need for me to starve, and indeed my prison was a very pleasant one. There were wild fruits in abundance, many of them unknown to me, but prominent among them the red, luscious, intoxicating berries that had saved my life in the desert, and these I now ate greedily, finding them much riper than when I had first tasted them, and their effect much more potent. They intoxicated me, perhaps maddened me, and dulled my intellect for the time, but they gave respite to my pain-racked frame, and gave me sleep. Sometimes for days I would give myself up to them, eating nothing else, and lying in a pleasant, dreamy stupor by the deep pool, staring into the dark, clear depths where the white sand glimmered so white. At times I roused myself sufficiently to search for other food, of which there was plenty. Partridges and other fowl swarmed at the water and were easily killed or trapped, and there was plenty of tessama growing quite close to the spot where I had fallen. These, since I had now an abundance of water, I did not attempt to eat, taking only the pips from the ripe ones, drying them in the sun and pounding them between 2 stones, as I had often seen the Bushmen do. From the coarse meal thus obtained, I made little cakes, roasting them on hot stones or the embers of my fire. Matches I had none, but my burning glass served me just as well, for every day the sun shone. Indeed, seldom did a cloud cross the sky, and whatever storms may have raged outside, nothing but the gentlest breeze ever reached the deep hollow that held me a willing prisoner. Willing? Well, at least apathetic, for all hope, all ambition, all interest in life had left me. I had forgotten the reason of my quest, forgotten the girl who had sent me on it, forgotten that I was once an erect and vigorous man with other interests than to crawl round for berries like an ape, and lie all day and sleep when once hunger was appeased. and thus I led an invertebrate, purposeless existence. I had warmth, food, and water, and the berries that gave me pleasant dreams, and I wanted nothing more. I took no note of the passing of time. Weeks, months, God knows, even years may have passed, nay, must have passed as in a dream, and I might well have died there beside the long bleached skeletons of my horses, but that one day chance or fate led me back to the path of reason. I had been sleeping off the effects of the berries, and lay beneath the shade of a rock close to the pool, idly tossing about the tiny pebbles of the little patch of shingle close to its brink, playing with them as a child might. And suddenly a glint on the corner of one of these little stones arrested my wandering attention. There was something familiar about it, something that stirred memories in my sluggish brain. What was it? I groped in vain for some clue. The pebble worried me, and I made a peevish gesture to throw it away. No, whatever it was, I must not do that. Rather, wash it. Yes, that was what we used to do. But where was the batia? For now, by some strange freak, I was back in Brazil and must have my batia. We washed our gravel for diamonds in that wooden prospecting pan. Diamonds? My mind was stirring, troubling me now, and with a trembling hand I thrust the pebble into a handful of others and worked them between my palms in the water. Yes, there it was, a good stone of 10 carats, slightly encrusted with oxide, a good find. And I? Where was I? I stood gazing alternately at the stone and at my surroundings, the pool, the circle of towering cliffs that hemmed me in, and gradually the floodgates of my clouded memory broke loose and I remembered all. The girl in England, old Anderson, Inyati, and the blue diamond, my ride and fall, all these came back to me almost in a flash, stunning and amazing me. But for long, the incidents of my life here in the hollow were vague and misty. The berries, surely they had been the cause of my lethargy, and even as I thought of them, the desire for them came upon me. But for the first time I fought it, for in my reawakened brain other desires were now surging. Diamonds! Inyati had told me there were plenty in his land. Had fate with a cruel irony led me into this land of wealth only to maim me and keep me a lonely prisoner here in this pit till I died? All this flashed through my mind as I stood and gazed at the stone. Then, righting my inclination for the berries, I plunged into the pool and found new strength and resolution in its refreshing coolness. Then I searched eagerly amongst the other pebbles and found 3 more diamonds, all fine big stones, yet not to be compared with the blue stone Inyati had given me. Where was it? My pack had been scattered by that terrific fall, but now I remembered the diamond had been sewn securely into the cartridge belt I had always worn. It must be here now with my clothes, for now I realized that I was as naked as a savage clothed, but in the long tangled hair on my head and chin scarred, blistered, and burnt till I looked like a wild man, as I had indeed become. And then I remembered my face, the vultures, and looking into the clear waters of the pool, I saw for the first time with sane eyes my terrible disfigurement, and cried aloud in anguish as I saw what manner of man I had become, and realized that even if I could escape life, life was for me a closed book. Scarred, grotesque, and horrible, what future was there for me among my fellow beings, even though I could return to them? Again, I was sorely tempted to seek the berries that would give me oblivion from all this agony of regret, but I struggled, and as night came, I slept a natural, refreshing sleep, and awoke with a newborn hope and determination strong in me. I would not die here as a wild beast. Somehow I would scale the cliffs and escape, or die in the attempt a better death than to perish like a rat in a trap without a struggle for liberty. My head was clearer now than it had been, for I know not how long, and I could reason. And Inyati's diamond was my first thought. I could find but little trace of my pack. The white bones of my horses were half buried in sand. A rusty tin here and a few shreds of clothing there being all that I could find near them. My rifle I found, or rather the remnants of it, for it had been broken to pieces in the fall, and no trace of the stock remained. At length, in a crevice near the pool, I found my revolver with a number of cartridges, my hunting knife, and a few odds and ends of clothing, all in a canvas haversack that still remained strong and sound, and at the bottom, my belt and the diamond tied up with Inyati's bracelet. But the leather belt had perished to a remarkable degree. It was hard, black, cracked and twisted, and broke at my first touch. And I found too, upon searching for the saddles, that nothing remained of them but some dried fragments. I realized then that months must have passed since my fall, but even then I had no conception of the terrible truth. Cheered by the discovery of the blue diamond, I now determined to look closely for others in the vicinity of the pool, but days of laborious searching brought no reward except that the work helped more and more to clear my foggy brain and bring me back to full sanity. I felt convinced that diamonds were there, not far off. However, one day as I vainly sorted over the gravel where I had found the others, the solution came to me. In the pool, in the white sand that shone as so at bottom, there I should find them. It was deep and narrow, this pool, and a difficult task even for a good diver, and I determined to wait till midday, when the sun shone full on the bottom. When the time came, I plunged in, and a rapid stroke or two took me to the bottom. The water was clear as crystal, and now I could see clearly why it had looked so white and sparkled so when seen through the rippling surface. Stretched upon the white sand lay the chalk-white skeleton of a man, the grinning mouth and sightless eyes staring up at me in a hideous travesty of mirth, and all around between the outstretched bones lay diamonds, diamonds innumerable, big, bright, sparkling beauties by the handful, wealth incredible to be had for the picking up, with no guardian other than these bare bones of a long dead man. The shock of coming face to face with his grim memento mori here in the depths of the pool was too much even for my desire for the diamonds, and I struck frantically for the surface, clambering out in wild, senseless, unreasoning fear, and not even pausing till I was well away from the vicinity of this spot, which had been my favorite resting place for so long. And that night I tried in vain to sleep, my brain whirling with wild surmises as to how the long dead man had found his way into the crater. Was there a path after all, or had he used a rope to let himself down in search of the diamonds, only to meet his death in some manner where they lay thickest? Or had he perchance passed years in the trap, vainly endeavoring to find a way out, pacing day after day round the ring of encircling cliffs, until at last, in utter despair, he had thrown himself into the pool to end it all, and to leave his bones there, watching the treasure he could not take with him? Each time I closed my eyes, the mocking, grinning skeleton seemed to be again before me, and it was not till early morning that I could rest. But with the day my fears vanished. Indeed, what was there to fear? For how could these few poor bones harm me? Still, I could not bring myself to dive into the pool again, but set about devising some other means of getting the diamonds. An empty gourd, cut into the shape of a bowl and lashed to a stick, solved the difficulty, and with this primitive dredge I brought up diamonds sufficient for a king's ransom. So many indeed that long before night even I was satisfied. Large lustrous stones they were, of splendid water, and several of them were blue. though none were as fine as the one Inyati had given me. So here was wealth far beyond my wildest dreams, and if I could but escape then, even disfigured as I was, life might still hold pleasures for me. Even if the girl who had sent me to this turned away in horror from my hideous disfigurements, there was much that money could bring. Travel, adventure, sport, 1,000 things, and at any rate the companionship of rational beings, for which I now craved as I had craved for water in the desert. For God knows how long I had seen no human being, no living creature indeed, but a few birds, and I had almost forgotten the sound of a human voice. Sunk in apathy, I had become almost as a beast, but the sight of the diamonds had aroused me, and I recalled how poor Inyati had called them magic stones. Magic indeed, for they had saved my reason. And with the sight of all this wealth, the desire to escape grew stronger, and with it grew a hatred of my hitherto pleasant prison, until the thought of remaining in it became intolerable to me. That very evening, I began a minute examination of my prison walls, but it was not till several days had passed that I at length discovered a route where here a crack, there a tiny ledge, and again a small projection offered a precarious chance of foot or hand hold, and where, if anywhere at all, a human being might essay the terrible climb to the deserts above with a remote chance of success. My mind made up on this point, I made what preparation I could for the climb and for the desert beyond it. My water bottle was still sound, and little as it held, it must suffice. For food I killed a number of partridges and roasted them, cutting away their plump breasts from the bone, for I realized that in the terrible climb before me, every ounce would tell. My knife, revolver, and a few cartridges I made a belt for by plaiting the strong coarse grass that grew near the water, and of the same material I made a hat, for I remembered only too well that I should find no shade in the desert should I succeed in my desperate attempt. Shoes I had none, but this did not trouble me, for my feet were hardened to the consistency of leather. The diamonds I made into a bundle with some shreds of clothing and stowed them in the canvas haversack, except for Inyati's and a few other blue ones which I luckily put in my pocket. All these belongings I conveyed one evening to the foot of the cliff, which I intended attempting to climb, sleeping at the spot so as to be ready and fresh for a start at daybreak. I feared little as to my strength, for in spite of my injuries, I was now stronger than I had ever been. But what I did fear was vertigo. From a child, I had always had a horror of looking down from a great height, feeling an almost irresistible desire to throw myself down whenever I did so, and I feared that as I neared the top, this would happen, and I should be dashed again to the floor of the crater. But better that and death than this endless captivity, and I did not shrink from my formidable undertaking. At early dawn, I drank deep from the gushing water that I was leaving, and fastening on my load, I began to climb. For a time, all went well, though of necessity my progress was but slow, and the sun was full overhead when I halted for a rest on a small ledge about halfway up. Here, for the first time since I started, I could lie at full length without having to hold on, and I needed the rest, for the strain had been terrific, and I feared that the worst part of the climb was still to come. So far, I had resisted all inclination to look down, but shortly after leaving the ledge, I was compelled to do so. I had been following a crack running diagonally up from it, and which from below had appeared to connect with another ledge favorable to me. But to my consternation, I found that this was not the case. 10 or 12 feet of absolutely smooth and vertical rock cutting me off from my coveted path to freedom. I was flattened against the wall, my heels overhanging the abyss, clutching with one hand a projection above me and feeling with my other for a new grip. But the rock was as smooth as polished marble, and it was evident that I must work back to the ledge I had rested on and try for a new route. And to do this, I had of necessity to look down. And as I did, so did the deadly vertigo I feared so much came over me. And it was well that I had good hand and foothold, or I should certainly have fallen. As it was, I clung helpless, sick and giddy, with closed eyes for some time, and it was only by the strongest effort of my will that I could force myself to again open them and work my way gradually back to the little ledge. There I threw myself down, panting and deadly sick, the whole world seeming to spin round me, and there I lay for some time, inert and helpless, before I could brace myself sufficiently for further efforts. At length I roused myself and started up again in another direction towards where I could see a few stunted bushes growing, and here, to my joy, I found a wider ledge than the last, leading steeply upwards. It came to an end, however, far below the cliff top. Moreover, the top actually overhung me, and it was evident I must attempt to work my way farther round before climbing higher. To add to my anxiety, I noticed now that evening was fast approaching, and I realized that I had but little daylight left to me, and should darkness find me still clinging like a fly to the face of the cliff, my fate was certain. I was almost exhausted, and my heart sank as I searched in vain for a way up. The distance was not great now, a bare 50 feet separating me from the topmost pinnacle. But though I walked along the bottom of this barrier for some distance, it still presented the same insurmountable difficulties. And the sun had set, and dusk was already falling, when, half frantic with fear, I at length made out a crevice which appeared to offer a possible means of saving my life. It ran diagonally across the rock at a steep angle upwards, going out of my sight around a big buttress that overhung me, and I could not tell whether it reached to the actual top or not. But it was my only chance, and with my heart in my mouth, I made my way towards it. I could just reach it, and setting my teeth and summoning all my courage, I gripped it fast and made my way gradually upward. For a few yards from my feet found a little foothold to help me, but soon I was dangling over the awful abyss. I dare not think of what lay below me, but with set teeth and muscles cracking with the strain, I edged gradually along till I rounded the buttress face, and here within 10 feet of the summit I found scanty foothold again. Here I stood quivering and exhausted till I had regained my breath, and then in the fast waning light I examined the few feet of rock that still stood between me and freedom. Barely 2 feet above my outstretched hand was the pinnacle that formed the edge of the cliff. But how was I to reach it? To spring from my precarious foothold was impossible, and not the slightest hold could I find for my fingers anywhere to draw myself up. Night was now upon me. To return to the ledge was out of the question, and I knew that I could not cling for long where I was. But that long before daylight came again, I must fall into the awful abyss that yawned beneath me. God, to die like this after all my struggle, to die within a few inches of freedom. Had I but a rope, and with the thought came inspiration. The sling of the haversack, it was of stout, strong canvas, and might hold could I but throw the loop over the pinnacle. It was a poor chance, but my only one. Hastily slipping it off, I held the bag in my right hand, and clutching my only handhold with the left, I attempted to throw the loop over the sharp point above me. Again and again I missed, and it was an agony of despair when at last it fell clear over the point and held. I hauled at it with all the strength of my free arm, and it held firm. But would it hold my weight? This I could not test, but I must perforce stake all upon the chance, for there was no other chance. Should a strand of the canvas give, down I must go hurtling to my death. There was no other way, and with an inarticulate prayer, I gripped the strap fast with my other hand and swung myself upwards. A second later, although in my agony it seemed an eternity, and my hand clutched the pinnacle itself, a wild convulsive scramble, and I was up, safe and free, at last. And even as I dragged myself into freedom, the haversack, loosened from its hold, fell with all its precious contents into the black depths below. Thank you for listening to the Unwind With Me podcast. Please join me again next time when I pick up in Chapter 7 of A Rip Van Winkle of the Kalahari. For more information, please go to unwindwithme.com, and I will be back again next time.